So here we go. Economic development, national and international. Now this is our Frühschoppen, our Sunday morning get together, right? We really ought to have some white wine. There used to be a program on the German television where they'd have all these journalists and they'd all be drinking Rheingau wine. We don't have that, but economic development, national and international. Now let's start off with an interesting problem. The Soviet command economy, it had great achievements. It contributed to winning the Second World War. It industrialized a very under-industrialized country, but then it failed. And why did it fail? One reason, of course, is that Marxism was inherently an unworkable ideology. Imagine the advantage to the British Empire of imposing a synthetic ideology on your supposed opponents. Right? This is the triumph of the, what can we say, of the intelligence game master, is that you force your adversary to imagine that the program you have concocted for the adversary is somehow the best program to fight you. So you've essentially controlled the mind of the other side before you even start. And I'm afraid that's what we have in the case of Marxism. But of course, Marxism really doesn't tell you how to do a command economy. Now, what they had at the center of this was something called Gosplan, Gasudarstvenny Plan, meaning the state plan, the 5-year plan, this first, second, third, 5-year plans. This had, again, great successes. We should not lose track of them, but those were then overshadowed by its later failures. In the Soviet Union, for example, students with the ability could get free education to a very, very high level. And that was also true in the German Democratic Republic, right? People were aware that you could be the child of a worker and go become a professor within a generation. So there was significant upward mobility. And again, we stress upward mobility because the U.S. is striking out on that score. The U.S., once again, I think we've mentioned it, the U.S. is now inferior to everybody in continental Europe in the point of upward social mobility, from the bottom quintile to the top 1 or 2 quintiles. There was, however, a huge stress on heavy industry for defense. Right? The Donbass. I remember in grade school writing an essay on the Donbass as the most highly industrialized region of the world, which at that time it was, with hydroelectric power from the Dnieper and so forth. So tremendous heavy industry. Again, a lot of it in the Ukraine, but then a lot of it behind the Urals, right, east of the Urals. So for defense, that was what you needed. But the stress on it became excessive, right? Coal and steel. These were part of the state plans. There was, at the same time, not enough emphasis on infrastructure, because this was not a goal of the planners, right? They would always think in military defense terms and heavy industrialization. Again, this is absolutely essential. But you also need to worry about your infrastructure, right? The stories were that the Soviets, they had no roads, right? The road from Minsk to Moscow was what it had been in the 1920s. There were no superhighways. There were no, the railroad system was underdeveloped. And then we get to the telephone system. The telephone system was the subject of many jokes in the Cold War, right? Where's the Moscow telephone book? And the answer was there was none. It was a secret. It was a military secret, for some of them at least. So you couldn't get through on the telephone. And then once you take people who are not politically motivated, they try to game the plan or storm the plan. In other words, if you have a plan quota, you try to make your quota in the last 2 or 3 days of the month, right? The first week, you sleep on the job. Second week, you get going. Third week, a little bit of momentum, and then storm the plan. And the word was, if you have a Soviet appliance, and it says it was made on the last day of the month, because it said so on the label, don't buy it, because that was when they were just throwing it all together to get it out the door and meet the plan. And the Russian term was, skoro budit, it will be here soon. You'd say, do you have any eggs today? Soon. So it fell apart. Now the other thing is, you can't allow the imperialist world market prices to intrude on this, right? You have to have political prices set by the Gosplan. Once you start allowing the world market, right, oligopoly, monopoly, so forth, to begin setting the prices, then you're lost. And that's what they did, right? It was done gradually, started in Hungary, went to the Soviets, didn't work. And then when you have countries like Poland that start borrowing a lot of money in the West, then essentially they have become vassals of the IMF system. But we don't want to lose sight again of the tremendous achievement of the industrialization of the Soviet Union, and without which, of course, Hitlerism would have prevailed on Earth. At least it would have prevailed over much of the Earth. But what we recommend is not the Gosplan, right? The Gosplan essentially says we're going to have a plan that tells you where every nail and every bolt go. It's too much. What we recommend is indicative planning. In other words, a list of national priorities, right? You don't try to plan the wage. You don't try to plan everything about it. You have a list of projects, and this we see in the New Deal, France under de Gaulle, Republic of China on Taiwan has an interesting story, MITI, the Japanese Ministry of International Trade and Industry, China has it. Really the success stories of the modern era in terms of development and advancement go to indicative planning. Where are the success stories of Austrianism?
They don't exist.
They don't exist. There are none. Yes, if Austrianism is so good and libertarianism is so congenial, where are the countries that have adopted this and made good with it? Right, starting with Austria. Austria doesn't want this. Austria was, sort of social democratic or Christian democratic, and Christian democratic often meant Catholic social doctrine. So that had some ideas that workers had rights, that families had to be fostered, and so forth. The opposite of Austrianism. Now you can say Abraham Lincoln, not a commie, although they would say so, right? They say he's a tyrant. In some ways, he's an indicative planner, right? The great plan is build the transcontinental railway, which had been proposed but voted down by the Confederates. Promote immigration, U.S. military railroads, and do all this with a controlled currency, the greenbacks. Not the British gold standard, but the greenbacks. A fiat currency. All currency is fiat currency. All money is fiat money. Anything you call money is a political decision, therefore fiat. There's no such thing as natural money. Somebody says gold, the next guy says, no, diamonds. No, cowries, clamshells, cattle, wampum. Well, what's it going to be? And remember, the most important thing about money, it's a political fiction. It has no metaphysical existence. Money is a political fiction. It is simply the means we use. Since we don't want to do the Gosplan, we want to use money to circulate commodities and put them out there. It has no metaphysical reality. The Austrians would say, the basis of metaphysical reality is money. Me gold, me gold. That's it's like the atom, right? In the Ron Paul universe, a piece of gold is the building block of the universe. Well, it's not. That's just crazy. What you're really talking about is, do you have some factories? Do you have some qualified workers? And what you want to do is use money to bring those together and start production. Production, of course, is the key point. So in the New Deal, this was not really done coherently. It was not done in the way that we would like. It was messy, perhaps inevitably so. But this was indicative planning, right? The Works Progress Administration of Harry Hopkins, you can see very impressive statistics. Roads, airports, public buildings. Go to some of the more rural states, right? You're going to find the public library, the school, the city hall, everything is Works Progress Administration, 1933-34. And on the way, when he started off, there were about 5 or 6 million people, or maybe more, who were threatened by starvation. This is now the horrible winter of 33 to 34. A lot of people could have died of starvation. Harry Hopkins sat down on a packing crate. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Harry Hopkins sat down on a packing crate, started calling up governors. Governor, I have $50 million for you. Get those shovel-ready projects out there. I want to see you hiring 10,000 people a day. And this is how the country was saved. The Public Works Administration was something like the Golden Gate Bridge, I think, was the PWA of Harold Ickes. He was a curmudgeon. Harry Hopkins, again, is really one of the heroes of the 20th century in the United States. I think I mentioned his grave is essentially a rat hole. Somebody needs to bring this guy back. He's very, very much hated by the establishment. And without him, the Second World War could hardly have been won. Because he was the guy who got Stalin. He essentially won the confidence of Stalin in 1941. And he was always very sick. Okay, Tennessee Valley Authority. Well, if you don't like malaria, if you want to have some hydroelectric, if you don't like floods, the trick with the TVA was the Tennessee Valley Authority alone had more electrical power than the entire German Reich at the end of the 1930s. And without that, you couldn't have built Oak Ridge, you could not have had gaseous diffusion of uranium, and all the rest of it. And then, of course, since parts of the U.S. ruling class were pro-Nazi, they didn't want to go along with the war mobilization, right? Alcoa Aluminum seems to stand out as one of the worst. That takes a lot of electricity. There was the War Plants Corporation, which essentially said, since Wall Street won't build a defense plant, we, the government, will. So the U.S. had a state sector, yes indeedy, a state sector, which was then sold off to these same pro-Nazi creditors, unfortunately. Now, this is a mouthful, but here's de Gaulle, right? Now, here's a guy with credentials, right? Military, political, economic. And the economic part is often forgotten. He talks about dirigism. Dirigism is us, I hope. And he says, I didn't want to put the country under a yoke. I wanted to guide its progress. That's what direct, right? Diriger, direct. This amounted to drawing up a national plan, deciding on the goals, the priorities, the rates of growth, and the conditions that must be observed in the national economy, determining the financial outlay which the state must make, the fields of development in which it must intervene, and the measures to be taken through its decrees, its laws, its budgets, I guess it was regulations maybe. It is within this framework that the state increases or reduces taxation, eases or restricts credit, regulates custom duties, that it develops the national infrastructure, roads, railways, waterways, harbors, airports, communications, new towns. When was the last time somebody built a new city? Not lately, but, I mean, the Soviets did it, but not after that. Maybe China, I think, has some. U.S. doesn't seem to have any. Housing. It harnesses the sources of energy, electricity, gas, coal, oil, atomic power. Initiates research in the public sector and fosters it in the private. That it encourages the rational distribution of economic activity over the whole country, right? You don't want to have some areas that are absolutely, brackish, right? That they just sit there with nothing, right? It's the fate of the high plains and places like this. By means of social security, education, and vocational training, facilitates the changes of employment forced on many Frenchmen by modernization, in order that our country's structures should be remolded and its appearance rejuvenated. My government, fortified by the newfound stability of the state, was to engage in manifold and vigorous interventions. How about that? That's dirigism. Right? And that's why they have the TGV trains. They did have a supersonic plane. They have 80% of their electricity from nuclear power. They have Airbus. That's what that came out of. So the benefits of this are still around, even though this has been eroded. It's called Mémoires d'Espoir, Memoirs of Hope. Please read it. Now, here's Miti, the Japanese miracle. Right? Until they were convinced to go free market in the mid-90s by James Baker and some other people, the Ministry of International Trade and Industry. I think they now have Ministry of Economics, International Trade and Industry, but anyway, it's MITI. The Japanese case differs from the Western market economies, the dictatorships of development. But again, dictatorships of development, somebody like Nasser did pretty well. But the new states of the post-war world. The most significant difference is that in Japan, the state's role in the economy is shared with the private sector. Now, a libertarian would say that's fascism. It's not. It's fascism if that is done to drive down wages and decrease production. But in this case, it's the opposite. It's to increase wages, increase production, increase national well-being. Public and private sectors have perfected means to make the market work for developmental goals. That's the idea. You don't want to abolish the market. You want to regulate it so that it does what you need it to do, what it should do. What should it do? Make 2% or 1% rich? No. Broad-based prosperity, full employment, rising standard of living, increased longevity, cultural and material progress. The pattern has proved most successful to be, and this is the key, this pattern has proved to be the most successful strategy of intentional development, in other words, that's what you're aiming at, among the historic cases. What he's really saying is from 1945 to 1995, the Japanese model was the champion of the world. It is being repeated today in the newly industrialized states, Taiwan, South Korea, Singapore, South and Southeast Asian countries, and China. Because this is what the Chinese had right in front of them. They could see Japan. We could also remember that some of this stuff goes back to General MacArthur and the modernization of Japan, somebody that I've always had a very high opinion of. Introduced unions, abolished nobility, abolished the House of Lords, rights for women, a land reform, huge land reform by MacArthur in Japan. The Japanese pattern has proven incomparably more successful than the state-dominated command economies of the communist world. And since the death of Mao, this book is 30 years old, even China, especially China, has come to acknowledge, if yet not emulate, well, that's obsolete, the achievements of the capitalist developmental state. This is Chalmers Johnson, and it's called MITI and the Japanese Economic Miracle. Now, how about, suppose you say, I'm from a small country, right? We want to reach out to the world. How about the Republic of China on Taiwan? 1978, during Carter, they had the idea that Carter wanted to destroy them, to feed them to Beijing as part of the opening to China. So 10 projects, a national highway from north to south, right? Kaohsiung is in the south. Electrification of one railway, another railway, the Chiang Kai-shek International Airport, the port of Taichung, the Suyao Port, 2 new ports, Chinese Shipbuilding Corporation, the Chinese Steel Factory, Oil Refinery and Industrial Park, Nuclear Power Plant. So there's your Taiwan economic miracle. And I should have added to the slides, and I will. Dr. Sun Yat-sen of China, at the time of the Versailles Conference, sent a proposal to Versailles saying, if you don't develop China, you're going to have a new world war. And what you should do for China is to build 3 new ports, one near Beijing, one Shanghai, one Canton, 3 ports, each the size of the Port of New York, which in those days was a port. Today only garbage goes out. But in those days it was a port. And he said, let's build 100,000 miles of railroad and 1 million miles of modern road. That's called the international development of China. He appealed to the powers to do this. So there's a great Chinese tradition of this. And there was a conference about that in Hong Kong in 1991, which I was honored to attend, where I gave a spiel about that stuff in detail. That paper is still around somewhere. Now, the Chinese show that they understand it with this stimulus, right? This is a little bit less stimulus in terms of money than the U.S. one. The U.S. about $750 billion. Here they are with almost $600 billion. But mostly infrastructure, railway, road, irrigation, airport construction. Then restore water projects and other things in the Sichuan earthquake zone. Low-cost housing, rehabilitation of slums, social safety net, rural development and technology advancement. And as a result of this, they're already enviable growth rate of 7.2% goes up to 8.4%. Now, the U.S., by contrast, put in $1.5 trillion in Treasury money plus a credit line of $27 trillion at the Fed only for zombie banks. And what do we have to show for it? Very little. And, well, you see it. This was simply badly done. Okay, now look. The ontology of human socioeconomic existence is that we are creatures of need, and we have got to have production for the fact that we are creatures of need. We need to attain progressive changes in the order of nature. If you are a religious person, you might argue that God created the world, but it was left unfinished, that there is continuous creation, that man comes on the scene as a helper of God to continue the great work which God had begun. This is the Leibniz argument. We need to have socially necessary services for the workforce. You've got to invest in your human capital. You've got to have full employment, right? Do you feel undervalued? Do you feel left out? Do you feel like nobody needs you? How about a labor market where people are constantly sending you job offers saying, come to work for me? No, come to work for me. If you're a woman working in a job today where your employer harasses you, well, if you have full employment, you can just say, drop dead. I'm going over here. I have a better offer anyway, right? Most of our issues, at least many of our social issues, are essentially crying out for full employment. If we had full employment, we wouldn't have a lot of young people on the streets getting into fight with cops in the center of the cities. Remember that the standard of living is dictated by the horizon technologies. You've got to make sure that your youth generation and your children are getting a standard of living that will put them in that area. Remember that new scientific discoveries and technologies have to be brought about, otherwise the society will soon collapse. And we're seeing that in some ways. And we need increased longevity. If people lived to be 25, we couldn't have any education, could we? In other words, right now you're going to need a college degree, you're going to need an MA, you probably need a PhD, you may need postdoc. And by that time you're 30, and if you die at 35, it can't be sustained. In other words, you've got to keep going until you're 65 or 70. In other words, the society has got to get back, and you of course have a vested interest in this. So there are always reasons at the level of the individual, and we hope to bring them into harmony. For example, if I ask you, why are there doctors? Well, one version is so sick people can go to the doctors, and that's of course true. But from the social, economic point of view, you've got to have doctors so people don't die at an early age, and all that education goes out the window, and the society is impoverished. So there are all kinds of reasons. Here it is. Universal quality health care is possible only in an advanced industrial society. That's the historical record. If you don't get to be an advanced industrial society, you cannot fund universal quality health care. So what do you need? S prime over C plus V advancing at an increasing rate. That second derivative. What's our problem? The U.S. is no longer an advanced industrial economy. People say, we can't afford health care. You can't afford anything. You're now a post-industrial junk heap. It's a service economy. Above all, financial services. I'm sorry, that is doomed. That cannot survive. It will either collapse of its own dynamic, or somebody will come along and give it a shove. And we showed you some candidates for that. The only way to allow humane treatment of individuals is through reindustrialization. There is no other road.
Webster, is Cuba an exception to that?
Well, I mean, actually, we admire the efforts of the Cuban government, right, to provide training for doctors and nurses, right? But you tell me, what's the life expectancy there are a lot of questions you'd have to ask about this. In other words, and obviously it's something you want to like, but I think that if you delve into it, you may find that there are some other problems because it coexists with a poverty scene, right? In other words, and of course the U.S. economic warfare. So I think it's a very complex question. But sure, Cuban doctors and nurses have had a tremendously positive role in Africa and all kinds of places, even Ebola. Now, one of our problems, the pace of scientific discovery has slowed over recent years. This has been a dry season. What do we got? The laser. The laser in 1962, that was one. Watson and Crick, DNA, right? The double helix, that's in the late 50s. We did get with Venter and Francis Collins, they went to see Clinton in 2000 that they had mapped the human genome, right? They discovered the language in which God created life. So that came out of Watson and Crick. And other than that, what do we have? We probably have some silicon chips, but they were already around. And the computerization is all well and good, but that's based on discoveries going back to the 30s, 40s, and 50s. I remember, you could be in a graduate class in, 1970, and they'd be telling you about the cybernetics revolution that was coming. Fact is, the pace of scientific discoveries has slowed over the past 60 years. This is one of the big problems of humanity and seldom discussed. Now, let's talk about child development, right? Cognitive development, because that's where it all starts, right? The preconscious. Family values. Sweden has decided to invest 1% of its gross domestic product so that you can have one parent at home for 13 months. The sense of identity, play, the development, all of this stuff. Absolutely great. And you see, though, how expensive it is. The problem with this stuff is you have to make sure that your absolute profit in the society allows you to pay for this stuff. In other words, you don't want to take this out of something else. You don't want to rob, the poor. Or you don't want to say, let's have euthanasia for old people so we can pay for this, right? This is not the way. It's got to be done all along the line, and the only way to do that is to increase the absolute profit of the society, S prime, right? So with this, you get better cognitive development and fewer neuroses and psychoses. You also get more women who are willing to enter the workforce. So if that's what your goal is, you can do that. And we have the learning societies, I think, again, in Scandinavia, right? Lifetime learning related to production and workforce development, which is fine. And that's got to be funded also. Now, let's look. We have a nice part of our talk coming up now. The great projects of infrastructure. Remember that Franklin D. Roosevelt at the Tehran Conference proposed to Churchill and Stalin that there should be a Tennessee Valley Authority for the Danube. It still hasn't been done, as far as I know, right? It hasn't been done from all the way. In other words, there are parts of it that are still not yet developed to the point that they should. But the goal would be take every river system in the world and give it the Tennessee Valley Authority treatment. Dams, hydroelectric, anti-malaria, anti-flood, and so forth. But let's go through some of our great projects. Right? The Tennessee Valley Authority, it is, from the 1930s, a world model for river systems. And this is not the TVA exactly. This is the TENTOM. This is the Tennessee Tom Bigby Canal. And what I invite you to do now is part of this is to enjoy the beauty of these objects, right? Their attractiveness, the idea of a world that has been formed and shaped in this way. In other words, the creation is great, but it's imperfect. We have to work, right? Good works, bona opera, as Leibniz says, are the thing that we're asked to do. And here's this beautiful canal. This is Lock A on the Tennessee Tom Bigby. This was actually built under Carter, I think, Amory, Mississippi. And you're looking upriver. So, maglev rail. The civil engineers put out the report card every year. The U.S. is now rated as D, getting a D. There are some movements regionally to do something about this. There's a charming lady called Gail the Rail. I wanted to give, or she calls herself Gail for Rail, actually. She's a retired military officer, and she has run for office repeatedly. You should look at this person, for the Virginia Independent Green Party. And unfortunately, they tend to somewhat get it rather narrow, right? It's like rail. Rail for us is important. It's not a monomania, right? We want other things too. But she'll tell you that rail is the solution to everything, and as far as that goes, it's a solution to many things. Now, the Italian statesman Camillo Cavour has a very interesting essay, since his problem was how to unite Italy. Remember, he said, I've made Italy, now I have to make some Italians. Right? Because they said, no, I'm a Roman, I'm a Turinese, I'm a Sicilian. So he said, we have to have national unity. What do? You build a railroad, and when the railroad goes into an area, the backwardness of the area does not go through the railroad. The railroad brings progress from cities and factories into the rural and other backward areas. So look at that very interesting essay. We want to talk about the Cape to Cairo Railway in Africa, the Dakar to Djibouti, so that's one is north-south, the other is east-west, Tennessee Valley Authority for the Nile, and let's talk about the Congo, the Nile-Congo Inland Waterway, and the Second Nile. First, let's see. We can see if we go across here. Whoop. I'm sorry, I can't get this all on one slide. This is the future. Part of it is already existing, right? A lot of it is. If you imagine all of this as fast rail and or maglev, here's the Cape to Cairo, Cairo to Cape. Here's the Trans-Siberian, Bering Strait, the United States. Anyway, I'm sorry I can't get this on here. This was a fault of my equipment. But the idea is you can link just about every place on Earth, including Japan. There are even ways to get something going down here, and even, down here is a little bit harder. But the entire land surface of the Earth could and should be spanned by at least fast rail by now. And this is one of the key points, right? The trait d'union between the two sides of the Bering Strait. We have NAWAPA, North American Water and Power Alliance. This idea has been around since about 1960. It comes from the Parsons Engineering Company. The last I heard of the Parsons Engineering Company, they had been reduced to working for the Coalition Provisional Authority in Iraq, building whatever, roads. But the idea is, in the Mackenzie River, up here in Canada, is a huge amount of fresh water which simply goes into the Arctic Ocean, more or less. Why not turn that river around and make it flow south? And if you do that, you go down through a Rocky Mountain trench, all the way down here, and the water actually will end up, some of it, in northern Mexico to allow a revival of the farm economy here. And with this, you will be rehydrating so many of the river systems in North America. So that's the freshwater diversion. Now, at this point, many people are freaking out. Some in Canada saying, "That's our water. You can't take it." Oh, wait a minute! I thought we had the North American Free Trade Zone, right? NAFTA. Yes.
Yeah, we could point to NAWAPA, I think, in particular, to people in the West who seem to be opposed to economic development,
Right.
such as Greens in California, or what we would maybe consider reactionaries in the Intermountain West who don't like a lot of federal power.
Right. You're absolutely right. And we want to bring them on board with this, right? In other words, we offer them a cornucopia.
Well, if NAWAPA had been done, this drought in the West might not be going on right now.
Right, right. Well, you see, anyway, it's hard to find decent maps of this, but you get the idea, right? The fresh water coming from up here, and then benefiting Canada, benefiting the United States, benefiting Mexico. This is another very important thing. If you would like to have more stable conditions on this border, why not create a flourishing farm economy in this area? And you're absolutely right, this arid area, the Great Basin, and indeed California, And of course, it's absolutely insane to have water to farmers cut off because the snail darter is threatened or some other exotic species, right? If you want wilderness, there is wilderness, right? You can go up here, right? There's a lot of land up there. Why don't you go if that's what you want? Right? You can't sit down at Fifth Avenue and 42nd Street and demand the wilderness.
Being from New Mexico and also in California, that's a hot issue.
Anyway, there we go. This is a somewhat more complex version, right? This is anyway. Here's NAWAPA. There are some supplementary programs that have been added, but you get the idea. There has to be a comprehensive approach. I think the U.S. still has a law that says interbasin transfer of water is illegal, so a lot of that stuff has got to be rolled back. The Nile. I've had in my life the experience of flying from Cairo to Khartoum, and it's great. You see Lake Nasser, that's the Aswan High Dam built by Nasser, right? Took the Suez Canal back from the British, used the tolls to build Lake Nasser. The Soviets ran the project, and the contractors were Italian. That's Aswan High Dam, and there's a big lake, and you fly over that. Khartoum, where the White Nile and the Blue Nile diverge, right at that point, there's a Hilton Hotel, and I stayed there with the view towards the north. You've got to do that. And then you go out for a ride on the Nile. And the sources, there is still controversy about the sources, right? The headwaters of the Nile, remember Bernini's famous statue in Rome has the Nile, the statue of the Nile with a veil over her head. Because they didn't know, and in some ways there still is a dispute. Anyway, comes from the Lake District of Africa. Now, one Nile is good, two Niles better. There is a project which started under Mubarak to start another Nile going off this way. Because if you look at the map, if you look at this between green and desert, you'll find that this is a green swath, but the rest of it is desert. So what do? You start over here, and you build a second Nile that goes up this way. Because a lot of the Nile still goes into the Mediterranean, right? Unused, right? Unfinished. So a second Nile. And that was started under Mubarak. Morsi and the Muslim Brotherhood, no. They're against it. So now I urge General Sisi to solidify his rule by creating hundreds of thousands of jobs by a crash program to build that second Nile. And then you can build new cities. You can resettle part of your unemployed population, right? Egypt is 90 million people, and they could certainly use a second Nile. Now here's the other one. If you go to Europe, you'll find that the Rhine and the Main, the Rhine-Main, has been connected to the Danube by a canal. Therefore, you can go from Holland and Belgium and places like this, northern France, Germany. You go down the Rhine, across the Main, and into the Danube. You can go all the way to the Black Sea through Romania, where at the end there's another new canal, relatively new, that cuts quite a bit off the trip. So what about this? Here's the Congo, Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of the Congo, and there's the Congo, and over here, Lake Victoria. Let's say they'll take Lake Victoria as our target. You could build a canal across here. And of course, with this, you're going to have to do some work. You're going to have to build some locks. You're going to have to do all kinds of things. But you get the idea. You could make this into an inland waterway, and it's really not that far. Right? It's maybe not as far as it looks here. And that would then allow all of this area to become a royal road of commerce and development. And of course, this area, this is the bloodiest war of the past, 20 years, has been the Congo War of the 90s into the Aughties. Millions and millions of dead. We can't go through it, but you get the idea, right? You want to stabilize that, you need economic development. Now, here's one of our favorites. I can see Russia from my house. So here we are, the Seward Peninsula, great guy, and the Chukotka Peninsula, right? Isn't it time to bridge the gap? Wrangel and the Arctic Ocean. here's what it looks like. Here are these islands, right? The two Diomeds, or Diomede, the little one and the big one. This is the U.S., right? I think both are. Certainly one is. And you want to build something across here, right? And there's an island there to help you. Take advantage. Anybody ever been on the Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel? Right? It's a bridge, a tunnel, bridge, tunnel, bridge. And that's a fairly, that's 50 years old. 50 years old. And they had to do it that way because they wanted to make sure the fleet could come out from Norfolk. Because if you just have a bridge, you could nuke the bridge and then block the straits. So this, I think, this is long overdue. And I'm humiliated as an American that the proposal on the table comes from the Chinese. Chinese have proposed to Russia, Canada, the U.S. and Canada, let's build the Bering Strait operation. That should have come from the United States. Come on, this is crazy. The origin of the company known as Western Union was something like this, right? That the way to get to Europe was by rail the other way, not across the Atlantic, but by rail this way. An artist's conception, here's the Bering Strait, and of course here you're going to have rail and road and telecommunications and the rest. And what that would then allow is, well, again, this is the Western Union idea. You want to go from New York to Paris, go this way. Because the further north you go, of course, the closer it is. So the thing that's missing is the Bering Strait. This is the kind of thing we should be thinking about, not about Deflategate. Now, the Japanese have had the bullet train, the Shinkansen, for a long time. The French have had the TGV, train à grande vitesse, in the intercity in Germany, right? The U.S., sorry about the typos, but the U.S. the U.S. has nothing to set against this, right? The U.S. has, Acela, better than nothing, right? Who's in the Acela? But remember, there's the law of combined and uneven development. This is our consolation if we act on it. In other words, if you're backward, you can make it into an advantage. So the other guy has got TGV and Shinkansen. Why don't you go directly to Maglev and jump ahead? And then you turn your backwardness and your folly into an advantage, right? Make backwardness into an advantage. That's the only hope we have. Remember, in order to do that, you got to get rid of that ruling class, huh? Because they're just hopeless. Now let's see some of the beauty of these things. You've never seen these on U.S. television. They don't want you to know what the rest of the world is doing, huh? Here's a Chinese high-speed rail, and they hit 302 miles an hour, Beijing to Shanghai, December 2010. Now that looks like a rocket ship on the land. And the things are just beautiful. Here's the Japanese one. The Japanese are trying to bring the backward and benighted U.S. out of the dogmatic slumbers of Malthusianism. They say, look, we'd be glad to build you this between Washington and Baltimore as a demonstration project because we want to popularize it, right? We want to show these backward barbarians that there really is something new under the sun.
Does anyone appreciate the irony of what they're doing? Commodore Perry
brought a locomotive.
To Hiroshima, they brought a train.
Yeah, they did. They brought a locomotive.
They took the piers around in the train to open their eyes.
So they can say, Perry, we are here.
Yeah.
But Governor Hogan and Hogan's villains in this benighted state, now unfortunately, once humane and advanced, but now benighted as of last week, he's going to say no. He's going to say, I don't want that. I'll take that money and I'll use it to run the state while avoiding tax cuts so I can make a name in the Republican Party. The German one, the Transrapid, here we are in northern Germany, Emsland, and here it goes on a raised platform. And the selling point on this, they always repeat, is the contented cows who graze here don't even notice when the train goes by, right? Because the Malthusians come out and say, wait a minute, you're gonna spoil the digestion of the cows. This is silent. You don't hear anything. It's just the wind, right? Did you feel a breeze? How about this one? Here's a Chinese maglev at the airport in Shanghai. It has been going since January 2004. 11 years. And I remember all we heard from Limbaugh and Hannity was scorn. It's a waste of money. We don't want to do it. It means they don't want to pay. These are rich, selfish, benighted oligarchs, sociopaths. They don't want to be taxed to pay for anything good. Well, fine. Some of this they will have to pay through the Treasury, but a lot of this can be done once again by forcing the Federal Reserve to cough up that 0% 100-year credit. Because ironically, many of the ideas of this come from the United States. That's the other huge irony, right? That the general idea of this is an American one. Okay, so Nawapa, the Bering Strait Tunnel, thinking of the Chesapeake Bay. Maybe we need a canal from Lake Superior to the Pacific Ocean for trade purposes, right? To link the Great Lakes industrial area with the Far East. Transcontinental maglev, the Texas T-bone is going to become a big issue, and there are many other regional ones, right? The California one, and so forth. Now let's think about some world trade. Here we are in the Far East, right? Here's Malaysia. Here is the Straits of Malacca. Here's the Sunda Strait. Now, a huge part of world trade has to go through there, because that's China to Europe, Japan to Europe, Indonesia to Europe, and so forth. And here's the problem. This is the Malay Peninsula. And the idea has been around, as you can see, for a while. Why not build a canal either here, or here, or here, or here, or better yet, all of them? Or at least more than one, so you have a spare, right? Because something can always go wrong. It is called the Kra region. I guess it's the Isthmus of Kra. So there is a Chinese plan, once again. 10 years, 30,000 jobs, $25 billion, just on the Japanese side. 80% of Japan's oil transits through the Kra, to the Straits of Malacca, right? So from the Middle East, from Iran, from the Gulf to Japan, it all has to go through there. And it's getting to the point where a huge ship goes through every minute or two, right? There's not enough space. I mean, it's just physically too limited. And if you want to go down here, that you can do that too, although that's also narrow and overloaded. And that's, of course, much further, right? That's a huge chunk. So somewhere here in the Kra area, and it's estimated that just by making the trip shorter, the ships are coming from over here, if you can just let them get across in the Isthmus of Kra, they go on to China. Here's Hong Kong and Canton. Let them go through. And of course, Taiwan is up here too. Let them go through Kra. Here's what you're going to save. 600 kilometers per transit. It's actually I've got this wrong now. There's a typo. It's how many barrels of oil go through. Anyway, you're going to be saving $50 billion a year. $50 billion, which is more than you're going to save more in 1 year than the price of building the canal. So why not build it? Obviously, the U.S. and the British, with their theory of the choke points, right, the narrow seas, they don't like that. So the U.S. has opposed canal building. Here you can see it in better detail. So that's Kra. Here's another one dear to my heart. The guy who helped me with the Moro dossier back in 1978, Zamberletti, is the head of the company that wants to go from Calabria to Sicily, right? So it's Scylla and Charybdis. This is it. This is where Odysseus, right, Ulysses went through here. Reggio Calabria and Messina. The point is, because of the tides and because of the way the Mediterranean works, there's a lot of turbulence here. Right? That's the idea that there are whirlpools here. Right? That's the basis of the Scylla and Charybdis myth. But so why not something like this? A bridge over the Straits of Messina from Calabria to Sicily. And again, what beauty! Looks like the Whitestone Bridge or the Golden Gate, right? But it's quite large. That would be tremendous. Beppe Grillo says, no. He doesn't want it. Right? Imagine a mass movement of dupes and fanatics that are based on the rejection of infrastructure and the improvement of the world in this obvious way. These beautiful objects are so beneficial, jobs. When you build something like this, the trick about infrastructure, you increase the productive power of labor in your economy. Think of the man hours, person days that you're saving for people who otherwise have to wait for these primitive ferries, which are not much different than they were 100 or at least something like that years ago. So the productive power of labor. And then, as I tried to argue the last time I was in Tunisia, if you're going to have this one bridged, then why not do the obvious and go across here from Sicily? This is Trapani, and here's Tunisia. And I have personally stood on the high point of Erice. Erice is a town up here on a hill where an international conference was held on what can we say, laser weapons, right? It was the Zikiki conference of Soviets, U.S., and Europeans about strategic defense, Star Wars, things like this. But I can tell you that from Erice, you can see Africa. You can see Tunisia in this case. And of course, it goes without saying, if you go to that bar, which is on the top of Gibraltar, if it's still there, you can obviously see Africa from there. So all of those places need to be connected, right? And that, I tried to convince the Tunisians. This was before the fall of Ben Ali. I said, look, you could, why don't you have an economic stimulus by working with the Italians? And if they're going to do that, then you're going to be, just even at the banal and useless level of tourism, right? You could already do a tremendous amount, but would be a great thing. So Cape to Cairo. Here's one thing about the Nile and so forth, right? Since I have flown this from, I've actually flown to Khartoum, and then I've flown to Juba. It's a while ago, but this is called the Sud, right? Sudan, Sud, meaning in Arabic, swamp. And this is one swamp. That's the biggest swamp in the world. The biggest swamp in the world. And the problem is that the Nile comes out of Uganda with lots of water, and it just becomes this huge swamp, and all that water goes out there, and it evaporates. But of course, it's a wetland, isn't it? It's a wetland, and those Malthusians, they say, don't you dare touch that wetland. The principle of draining swamps has been around since the time of the Roman Republic. Right? The Romans knew what you want to do with a swamp is to drain it. You don't want tuberculosis, you don't want malaria, you don't want all the things that go with a swamp. So the idea was, since you lose the navigable tract becomes really hard to follow. So the idea was, why not just cut a canal through the swamp, and then the water is going to flow out. You're going to massively increase the fresh water here in the White Nile all the way down to Cairo and Alexandria and so forth, and Suez. So this is now the separate country. The British had fomented the secession of South Sudan for 100 years, because down here is oil, and down here is this canal. So it's called the Jonglei Canal. Jonglei. And a machine was built. German engineers came in and said, look, we can make you a big machine that's going to dig this canal. And here's what it looks like today. There's the machine. This is called Lucy. It's a German excavating machine, and it was digging the Jonglei Canal through the Sud, the largest swamp in the world. This project would have added 7% to the freshwater supply for 82 to 90 million people in Egypt. And it was destroyed, crippled, by a rocket fired by the Sudanese People's Liberation Army, controlled by the CIA. This was this guy, John Garang, right, who had trained at Fort Hood.
Leavenworth.
Huh?
Leavenworth.
Leavenworth. Well, anyway, he's dead now, but the damage is done. So now, 30 years, this excellent piece of machinery has been sitting there. Let me see if I get you a better picture. It's just rusting.
If developing reduces the population, and that's
Huh?
if developing reduces the population.
No, it doesn't. It reduces the birth rate.
Right.
But the population continues to grow. The families tend to become smaller with more capital investment. Of course, in the future, you could also provide a safety net that would allow larger families. If you distributed the expenses of education and healthcare to a social level, you could also have larger families. But it does not reduce the population. Absolutely not.
Okay. Well, then if that was their goal, then I was just wondering why they won't let Africa develop.
Because they're irrational. Because also they don't want anybody to be powerful. Right? They realize that countries with industry, a full set economy, you can say no. I'm not taking orders. Right? That's the Russian case, the Chinese case too. This is what it looks like though. Look at this. It's just rusting away. 30 years of rust. This picture is not even 30 years. It's less. Latin America, you need all kinds of things, right? You need Atlantic to Pacific canals, the TVA and the main systems, the Amazon, the Orinoco, Rio de la Plata. You get the idea. Let's look at the one that's in the news right now. Here's your Panama Canal. Great. U.S. has lost control of that. The Chinese have rebuilt it. But now we are in Nicaragua. And the idea is going to be most probably this route for a canal. Atlantic to Pacific. The U.S. is against it because they want to keep, they figure that they have a better chance to control one than more than one. And what's been done now is the mobilization of what are called indigenous peoples to come out and say no to this. Right? And this is, of course, you got to look for CIA, look for Soros above all in this. The idea, again, 1895, American newspaper cartoon, Uncle Sam's next job, says the Minneapolis Tribune, build the canal across Nicaragua. Not Panama, right? So there were competing ideas. This idea is not new. It's been there for quite a while. And remember, this is not the only one. There's the Panama Canal. You can do a canal here in Guatemala. You can do it across Honduras. You can do Nicaragua. You can do Costa Rica. And this map, I tried to find one. There's another plan that goes across Venezuela. Goes through here. And even further south. I knew a Peruvian senator, Josmel Munoz. And Josmel, he's telling me that the Amazon reaches into Peru. You think of the Amazon as being in Brazil. Let me see if I have a map. Do I? Probably not. No. The Amazon goes into Peru, and if you're in Peru, you could easily do a canal. You'd have to go across some mountains. You could do a canal that would connect the Pacific Ocean to the headwaters of the Amazon in Peru, on your own territory. And as soon as the Peruvian Congress began discussing this, sure enough, the U.S. ambassador came in and said, we'll never allow this. We will not allow you to be able to transit from the Atlantic to the Pacific up the Amazon. That would take some work too, of course, but the idea would be for the future. So there are really at least seven possibilities for developing commerce in these ways, right? And again, if that Craw Canal is 30,000 jobs for 10 years, that gets you into some job creation, doesn't it? Now, there are some ones I think we mentioned yesterday. For the Middle East, you want to focus on a Marshall Plan to rebuild the war-ravaged and austerity-ravaged countries. The key problem is water. You're going to need desalinization of water, probably through nuclear reactors, maybe thermonuclear if it comes in time. But with this, you could, the trick is create a common interest where no common interest exists. In other words, you're trying to convince the Israelis and the Palestinians that they have a common interest. They deny it. You create something like this, a Marshall Plan that says, look, we're going to solve your water problem, right? When the Israelis are not going to have to pirate the Litani River in Lebanon or other water courses. we're going to provide water. And then say, look, now under those terms, can you make peace? Right? Because otherwise you're not going to get it. Right? The only way you get it is if you make peace. You've got these demagogues running around, Netanyahu in particular, he wants to come here. Somehow you got to put them out of business. It's not easy to deal with that kind of inflammatory rhetoric, but it can be done. Now here's another one. Isn't that beautiful? That's the port of Gwadar, and we're now in southwest Pakistan. Look at that place. Built by the Chinese. Once again, what happened to the United States? Do we exist?
Chinese, just this month, were building a maglev from Mexico City to the state of Querétaro, and they shut it down. Something shut it down. Not
The U.S.
Chinese,
ambassador.
U.S. ambassador, yeah.
Carlos Slim, maybe?
Carlos
Well,
Slim.
I'm not sure, but the project was about to launch and it stopped. The
No.
Chinese financed it.
You got to remember, this is Baluchistan.
Is this the only deep water port in this area of the world, too?
Well, I don't know about that, but here's the idea. It's Gwadar, Baluchistan, Pakistan, right? So you're here. The obvious thing is have a port here and build this connection. Some of it's already there. And you're going to go to Islamabad. You're going to cross into China, I believe, above Kashmir. And this could be a pipeline, a road, and a railroad into China. And the obvious advantage of this is that you could have you would even relieve the Kra Canal at this point, because a lot of tankers on their way to China could simply stop here, offload, and put it on that pipeline. Here it says roads and high-speed rail, but why not build a pipeline there too? And indeed, while you're at it, why don't you build a pipeline from Iran right to Gwadar? That's not so far. This is Iran right here. Right? So come across from Iran and put that into Gwadar. And this would, if you could do that overland, you would solve the existential problem of the Chinese, that they feel that they can't rely on their waterborne oil because of the Anglo-American naval superiority. Right? So this would be a great step for world peace. And if you're going to build that pipeline, don't stop in Iran, go to Iraq. And go to Saudi. Why not? Go there too. Go to Emiratis. You can just take that pipeline as far as you want, and you've done something, I think, important. And that's really the only way that some of these areas are going to quiet down. And if you offer those guys a job on the pipeline, then you've done something for them. Otherwise, here it's going to be this. There it goes. You see the idea, right? Other people around the world have not chosen to blind themselves with Malthusian lunacy and fanaticism. So, summing that up, we have fanatics who oppose infrastructure. We, who attempt to prolong the heritage of the New Deal, say the only way out of depression is infrastructure. It was so in the 1930s. In Germany, in the United States, and it's the same today. There was, for example, around the city of Stuttgart, a huge fight. It was going to be a regional rail hub, and all the lunatics came out of the woodwork and said, let's stop the Stuttgart Railroad modernization. I think by now it has succeeded. It's being built. Then there's the question of the TAV. Beppe Grillo and his, Grillo, no, it's not, it's Grillo. He's this, again, proto-fascist is the only thing I can call him. And he's a losing proto-fascist, thank goodness, these days. But there was a proposal to build a fast rail between Turin, Italy, auto production, and Lyon in France. And that would go through this Suza Valley. It's an alpine valley that goes up towards France.
Syriza exit poll is currently 37%.
That's the biggest it's been.
It's the biggest
Good,
it's
yeah. Here, look, I have what I have about that. Just to interrupt, keep in touch. By the way, why doesn't somebody draw up a nice declaration of support that we could send from this meeting, huh? Somebody draw up. Anybody want to do it? Our writers, draw something. Just write us 3 or 4 sentences that we're gathered here in Silver Spring, Maryland. We're from all over the world, and we send you cordial congratulations on winning the election, and we're looking forward to working with you in the fight against austerity worldwide.
From its international conference in Silver Spring, Maryland, the United Front Against Austerity and Tax Law.
Say Washington D.C.
Send your congratulations. Okay.
Look, I have the last poll. This is concluded on the 23rd. They say that we now get to the seat projections. 145 seats for Syriza. The New Democracy austerity ghouls go down to 78. They have lost the 50-seat bonus. Watch out, though. The River gets 20. Let's see. KKE Communists, they're hopeless. They get 16. PASOK, the Socialist International, gets 14. But ANEL gets 9. Now, ANEL, again, this is not ideal, but if Syriza does not get the absolute majority, then they could turn to ANEL for another 9 votes. Because otherwise it becomes, what can we say, ungovernable.
What is the number for majority, Webster?
It doesn't tell you here. 151?
300 seats, all in all.
300?
151.
And they have 147 now?
145 according to this.
The exit polls say 146 to 158.
So it
So
could
there's-
be a majority.
Wow.
Yes, it could. And you want them to have an absolute majority, because otherwise the coalition, those guys are always going to drag their feet. Golden Dawn, 18. So nothing special going on with them. But if everybody fails, Golden Dawn will begin to gain. All right, so we're going to get that, right? We'll put that out. Remember, this is a historic moment, Clark. This is the communique that puts us on the map. All right, so the Grillo people, they organized violent demonstrations to stop building a fast rail up this valley. And the so-called indigenous peoples, some of them not so indigenous, in the Soros orbit, they're trying to stop the Nicaragua Canal. I urge you to look at that movie Quantum of Solace. Right? That is Solace is Soros. Soros had the Quantum Fund. So Quantum of Solace is Quantum of Soros, Soros Fund, and it's about this guy who pretends to be green, but he's really interested in buying up water and using it to exploit indigenous peoples. And of course the U.S. did block that Peru Canal. We want to remember the importance of Gaddafi's man-made river, and the Jonglei Canal has been blocked. So you get the idea that it's a struggle. And I don't even go into pipelines, right? The U.S. has successfully blocked the South Stream pipeline, right, across Turkey and into Europe. But, of course, in the Far East now, we've got 2 huge things going on between Russia, Gazprom, and China. So here's oil for China, and I guess natural gas is actually what this is. So we have one natural gas and the second natural gas. And I guess it's this one is the $400 billion one that has been announced most recently. And I put this up here that if you don't go into this business, you're lost. You will be left behind. Malthusian ideology cripples the ability of a country to keep up with the competitive situation in the world. And again, the South Stream has been crippled. This pipeline seems like it's going to stop in Turkey, but there is North Stream. Right? This is the interesting one, Nord Stream. This cannot be stopped because it goes down the bottom of the Baltic. And the goal of that, from the Russian point of view, was to avoid this situation where the Kiev fascist clique controls that flow, what you see here, of gas into Europe. Nabucco was the Trojan horse used by the Anglo-Americans to try to stop South Stream, and I don't think it's going anywhere. It was never serious. It was merely a sabotage maneuver. I think this one, though, this seems to go through Belarus, if I'm not mistaken, at least to some degree. And then you're going to have the pipelines out here. Now, this is oil and gas. So this is the way of the world, right? The world has decided that this is going to get constructed. Again, compliments to the Nord Stream from Viborg in Russia to Greifswald in the old East Germany to revive them. This is gas. 1,100 kilometers down the Baltic. And this was international. I know the Italians, Snam, did the planning. There were half a dozen countries easily involved in this. Again, not the U.S. because of the State Department and this lunatic Malthusian ideology. Now, on the nuclear, now we get to the heart of the matter, right? The absolute taboo, right? Here's nuclear units, we thank NEI, nuclear units under construction and planned worldwide. China has 23. Now, 23 may seem like a number, if you compare that to the U.S. has 103. The problem is the U.S. 103 are all museum pieces, right? And they're dangerous. You don't want them. So China's building 23. Russia's building 11. India. What's in the news this morning is that Obama goes to India. What do they want? The Indian government says we want Westinghouse and these other U.S. companies to build nuclear reactors in India. So you can't build them here, but you can build them in India. What is that thing with Lenin? And he says the capitalists will sell us the rope we will use to hang them. No, that's obviously not what India has in mind, but you get the idea. This, again, the lunatic nightmare atmosphere that we live in with the Malthusian terror propaganda everywhere blinds us to this stuff. Japan is fighting back. I guess this is not necessarily up to date, right? The Japanese may have vacillated on this, but South Korea is forging ahead. What we seem to know about the U.S. is the U.S. is building 1. Taiwan is building 2. Bulgaria, Ukraine, I don't know what the status of that is. Again, Slovakia, France. Some of these are to meet the German demand, since the Germans can't build any on their own territory. They build them elsewhere. Anyway, that's one version. And here's the other. What have you got under construction? Right? What's actually coming? 24, 11. Korea gets 6. Korea is going to be a powerful, prosperous country. India, Bulgaria, Slovakia, Republic of China, and again, then in Latin America, Japan. U.S. comes in last. The caboose on the train. Now again, what is it? Do you think the left liberal Malthusian mushheads have a monopoly on wisdom that they can say to the entire world, which is practically what you see here, that this is folly, that it's wrong, that you should think about windmills and solar cells? That's national suicide. It's just insanity. It's sociopathic obstruction of the obvious path of progress. And again, look at that Chinese one and that Russian one. If only in the logic of self-preservation and balance of power, you'd think that they'd go with it. But now, for some people, this is all too much. But now here's one that I think everybody can agree on. Right? This is now the ITER, the International Tokamak project, which is now being built in this beautiful setting in the south of France. ITER is in that red dot you see, very close to Marseille and the French Riviera. Right? If you find a way to go work there, you probably want to do it. And here, the other idea with ITER is that it succeeds in uniting the countries you see in blue. So Russia, China, India, South Korea plays a big role, Japan, European Union, and U.S. So this is truly mankind getting to work on something important. Now, the nuclear we've talked about so far is nuclear fission reactors. We're now in the area of the nuclear fusion reactor, the same response that we see going on in the sun and other stars. Now let's just enjoy the site. Here's, I think it's an artist's conception of what it's going to look like. This is going to be the main tokamak and hopefully the electrical surge coming out of it, right? The point is to get above break even. And fusion has been going on for a long time, and it's now, I think, within our grasp to see this become an actual source of energy. The raw material, of course, seawater, or any kind of water that you have can be used. So it's a tokamak. That word has something to do with the Russian word for donut. So here it is. It's a magnetic confinement chamber. It goes around. It's like a donut. And with this, they want to show you the plasma, which has been heated in this to 40 to 50 million degrees. That is a temperature which has not been observed in nature. So this is an actual change in the order of nature wrought by man. And indeed, the 40 to 50 million has been reached 20, 30 years ago at Princeton. But the U.S. is no longer in the lead in this. Other countries have pushed ahead. There is still a Princeton plasma physics reactor out there on Route 1 near the Princeton campus, but the U.S. is struggling to keep up. I think the size of a person is about the height of that beam that you see there. That would be about the size of a person. You'd think they'd put one in there for comparison, but you get the idea. So it's a huge magnetic confinement, but with various refinements. And then around the outside, a refrigerator. In other words, to make sure that it doesn't overheat, or that any heat, if you're dealing with 40 to 50 million degrees, you don't want that to come thrusting out. So here's the refrigerator confinement area, the cooling system. So that's the world which is at your beck and call. All you need to do is to convince the Federal Reserve that when you have idle factories and unemployed workers, issue credit, put them together, start production. There's no reason to have a depression. There never was. And don't worry about monetary aggregate, don't worry about anything else.